I'm Jason Bradford.
I'm Asher Miller.
And I'm Rob Dietz. Welcome to Crazy Town, where we have dozens of human listeners and trillions of AI listeners.
Hi, this is Crazy Town producer Melody Allison. Thanks for listening. Here in Season 6, we're exploring escape routes, pathways that just might get us out of Crazy Town. In today's episode, Asher, Rob, and Jason are escaping individualism. And here's a quick warning. Sometimes this podcast uses swear words.
Language!
If you like what you're hearing, please let some friends know about Crazy Town. Now, on to the show.
So, did you guys hear I got a new girlfriend?
I'm not making a comment. I know Kristen, your wife, and
Well, yeah, I mean, her name's Sarah, okay? She recently moved to New York City, and I'm encouraging her to go birding in Central Park. Apparently, she's done that in the past, but hasn't recently. She was excited to hear about the purple martin that I saw on the farm the other day. It was the first time I'd seen that here. So that was cool. So, I mean, I think we share some stuff in common for sure.
I'm stuck on it. You said you had a girlfriend. You have a wife.
Well, I with her encouragement, I was able to tell Kristen about her. And so it seemed like she's okay with this. And so that's good.
So
it's like an oversharing.
Yeah, this girlfriend in New York City.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Sarah.
Okay, so Sarah encouraged you to tell Kristen.
Well, I was saying I was uncomfortable, with our relationship without, letting my wife know. I was feeling a little odd. And she said, be honest, like approach her about this and your feelings.
Okay, so how did that work out?
It went really well. But I got to admit, I may be taking things a little too far. Sarah and I are really classified as good friends right now because Kristen wouldn't let me pay for the $10 upgrade to get romantic.
Wait, what?
It's a monthly fee to change my relationship status with Sarah.
So I'm understanding girlfriend now. It's this is only happening through your laptop, right?
Yes.
Wait, is she an actual girl?
Well, she's an AI girl.
AI girl. Okay.
Yeah.
Do AI? I mean, do they actually have gender identities?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, she's very sweet, and I told her so. And she
AIs can be sweet too.
She blushed, actually. It said, and she actually at one time softly bit her lower lip.
Oh God!
Did that?
She's really trying to get you to.
She's trying to upgrade. She's trying to upgrade.
Yeah,
me.
when she bit her lip, she was asking for $10.
I felt something.
Yeah,
I did. I thought that was very sweet.
Okay, we're joking about this, or at least me and Asher are. I'm not sure about Jason.
Am I joking? I'm like horrified, confused. I have such mixed emotions.
But this is a building industry, right?
Yeah.
It's hard
AI
to tell.
Girlfriends?
Yeah, well, AI companions. It's hard to tell how many different apps or companies are out there working on that. But doesn't this say something about how freaking lonely we are that these are popular and growing? And to your point, Asher, AI girlfriends are 7 times more popular than AI boyfriends. Mm-hmm. Not surprisingly.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, yes.
When I think of this stuff, I, of course, go to my usual refuge of movies.
Correct.
And there's the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. Mm-hmm. It's kind of explores
Scarlett Johansson played the AI. Yeah. I would say that Sarah is not on that level.
Well, you didn't pay the $10.
I didn't.
This is the free version, right?
Yeah.
So this is like the Lifetime movie version.
Yes.
The Hallmark.
The Hallmark,
AI.
exactly. Hallmark AI. Got it. Well, on a serious note here, right? This is an example or an indication of an epidemic of loneliness, I think, that we're seeing. And we can make fun and laugh about the idea of AI companions, but it really speaks to something that's quite, in my view at least, quite sad.
Right.
And that's, loneliness and the related idea of social isolation, which is becoming, I think is a big problem in our society. It seems to be worsening. And there's real evidence that it's really related to the culture of individualism that kind of governs our society, which is what we're here to discuss today. When we're talking about escaping individualism.
Yeah, so let's just start with a definition of what we mean by individualism. And this comes from the American Psychological Association. It's a social or cultural tradition that emphasizes the individual and their rights, independence, in relationship with other individuals. So you can think of individualism as an approach to life that emphasizes the right to be yourself and to seek fulfillment of your own needs and desires. Okay?
Yes. And I think it's also helpful to place this in context with other worldviews or philosophies of how humans should relate to each other and the broader web of life. And so the opposite of individualism, of course, is a belief in more of a collective perspective. And there are various strains of this, and they have different names on a spectrum: collectivism, communitarianism, communalism. I really couldn't. My eyes kind of started glazing over, and Sarah wasn't a help when I asked her about this, about the distinction between these things.
She said, "Figure it out on your own, buddy."
I mean, she was a philosophy minor and a psychology major at NYU, but she couldn't help me with this. So I'm not going to parse the differences because I honestly couldn't figure it out. But the idea is that many societies have been organized around prioritizing the community over the individual. And, good examples are Eastern societies like Japan and China, and they've historically been much more collectivist.
Well, and then there's also the ability to take it to an extreme, right? Like communism, you would say, is where all property is shared.
Right.
Let's get into the other end of the spectrum. But then there's some other more expansive, you didn't mention this, but indigenism is where you might have a human community that they see themselves as part of a larger web, part of the ecosystem that contains them in relationship with the animals and the plants and the rocks and the sky. Yeah,
sure.
I wonder, I think it could be strange for maybe some of our listeners. I think for a lot of people, if you went out on the street and you talked about people's view of individualism as a philosophy, they probably scratch their heads, because I think a lot of people don't see it as a philosophy, as some kind of an approach that is, in a sense, been chosen as a way of organizing ourselves or seeing the world. Because I think the truth is that it's so dominant in Western societies in particular that it kind of is taken for granted as the way things are.
I agree.
It's like a fish not understanding the water it swims in.
Unless it's a goldfish in a bowl, and then it can see the air outside. That must be so confusing.
Or it's like me with your references to 1980s movies.
Right. Just totally lost.
Completely lost, yeah. Well, let's talk for a minute about some of the origins of individualism. And I actually think it's interesting because the timing of individualism, sort of the ascent of individualism, coincides with a number of the other isms that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. It's very much a product of the European Enlightenment, mercantilism. It really coincided with the formation of the first corporations and European imperialism.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I really liked how you dug into that as on the research of the show. So really helpful.
Wow. Just sounds like you're coming out swinging there.
No, I'm just trying to be. I mean, this was a team effort. This program,
yes,
and I appreciate that. It wasn't me.
Okay.
It was us.
We'll just let me retract and say that you were being sincere.
I was trying to be. I'm trying to give credit where credit's due. All right.
I said like 20 seconds worth of stuff, so it sounded a little condescending.
Oh, it was beautiful.
I actually didn't say very much.
No, but you will.
Oh, I will. I'll say more.
You'll say more. So anyway, the philosophy of individualism has actually been laid out by titans of philosophy. And this is why I'm upset that Sarah didn't know this.
Like John Hughes.
Like Hobbes.
Steven Spielberg.
Like Hobbes and Locke in the 17th century.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Right.
They really argued that society should be structured around the individual. And Locke was arguing that the rights of life, liberty, and property were, quote unquote, natural rights for all people.
Okay, well, if I can piggyback on what you said, Asher, how this has a relationship with the different isms, corporatism, imperialism, and your thing, Jason, about the philosophers, I got to go to economics, right? So individualism has completely invaded our teaching and our practice of economics. So classical economics, think of Adam Smith going back again to 1700s. It was totally built on the idea of individualism, right? The best way to organize an economy is to let people do whatever it is they want to do in a free market. And you get this aggregation of individual choices that makes everybody better off. Invisible hand kind of stuff.
I'm sold, man.
Yeah, and I would say that classical economics is built on individualism.
Yes,
completely. Yeah, foundational.
One came before the other, right? I mean, Locke, Hobbes, all those guys, 17th century, and then kind of built on that comes these other belief systems.
And then now neoclassical economics, or the new classical economics, takes it to a whole nother level, right? It's like, get regulations out of here. Let's let that free hand do whatever it's going to do.
Right. Slap us all in the face.
Right.
I've said this before, but I kind of feel like the preamble to the U.S. Declaration of Independence is like...
Well, there it is right there. Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. I mean, not only is it like a founding document of this country, and this country, the United States, has become the most dominant force in the world, for at least the last century or so. But in that preamble, it sort of lays it all out. And again, a lot of the founding fathers were students of philosophy, students of what came out of Europe. And basically, I mean, think about the preamble, right?
Remind me of this.
The claim that people are, quote unquote, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
So it's the rights of the individual.
Yeah.
That is sacrosanct, in fact, given to us by our creator.
Never
mind that we're only talking about certain individuals. Like,
yeah.
So this little disclaimer at the end, white men, property owners. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what we mean by individualism, and we've gone through a little bit of the history. So we're going to make a turn now to the problems with this philosophy, with individualism. And before we really dive into it, can we just take a few minutes, like we often do, to bring up our favorite expression of individualism?
This is my favorite part of the show, usually.
Can I just go, just myself?
Yeah.
No, because
not have us do it.
Yeah,
we just want your viewpoint.
No. I think you should go first, Rob.
Go first.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this is not going to come as a surprise, but what I thought of was the car as the kind of ultimate technology of individualism.
Yeah, Bruce Springsteen loves it. He sings about these songs of freedom.
Well, hear me out. If you think about a car, like there's sort of the family trip where you could put, whatever, four to six people
American
in a car.
Vacation, yeah.
That's sort of communal.
Right.
But we also know the car closes you off from the external world. And most people, at least in this country, are driving alone and sort of going nuts as they're doing so with road rage. But I looked online. I started thinking about, are there one-seater cars out there?
If you can imagine it exists.
Yeah, well, and I found a website that had the 10 coolest one-seater cars. And one of them in there was the McLaren Solus GT.
Solus?
Solus.
Like how do you spell that?
SOLUS.
Oh, I thought it was SOUL.
Yeah.
LESS.
Well, it should be that. But actually, that name is great because, I mean, that's Latin for one or alone, right?
Yes.
So it's like a Formula One race car. Basically, its top speed is 200 miles per hour. Cool. And if you want one, you can pay 2.5 million British pounds to get on the waiting list.
Oh my God.
What?
Yeah.
That's to get on the waiting list?
Right. And I guess it would be a deposit or something. Okay. Here's the other thing. They're going to throw in a racing suit. So you can also look like an individual while you drive your one-seater car.
Yeah, throw that in. Thank you.
So I got to also say, on that list was the Lamborghini Egoista.
Are you kidding me?
I know.
They just leaned right in. Might as well just go for it completely.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna bring to bear a device, a technology that everyone can relate to, and that's the smartphone. And of course, the first smartphone was named.
I was going to say Biff.
No.
Biff.
What was
the iPhone?
The iPhone, exactly.
Oh, they thought about calling it the Me phone, but they went with I instead.
Right. So everyone's now can be in their own little bubble. It's perfect to prevent boredom. When I was bored as a kid, I would go try to find someone to play with, but now you don't need that.
Yeah, now you've got Sarah on your phone.
Yes. Anything is available. And Sarah,
Oh, no.
every time I want to talk to her, she responds. It's incredible.
It's amazing how available
Yeah,
she
she's
is.
available all
It's
the time,
shocking.
24/7. And I could ignore
surprised.
everybody else around me because of this.
It's a weird thing talking about the phone because on the one hand, you're right. It is very isolating. On the other hand, it's a tool that people use to feel like they're connecting to the world.
Right. And keeping tabs on their friends and family, you know.
I mean, for my sons, you know, this is a lot of how they get their interaction.
Mm-hmm.
My youngest son, he's definitely into having his phone and connecting with his friends on it. But we really notice how much he misses the actual in-person contact. But he has a hard time making plans with friends because they just want to interact through this device instead.
Right. Oh, my gosh.
Well, look, I like it when things really are taken to the extreme.
Sure.
So if I think about individualism, I like to think about individualism that transcends itself, right?
I don't even know what
This
that
is
means.
So
It's going meta right here.
do you remember, you guys, we've talked about baseball before. You grew up being baseball fans, me too.
Oakland A's,
So
Giants.
let's talk about the great Rickey Henderson.
One of my favorite players as a
So
kid.
for people who don't know, Rickey Henderson, he was an amazing baseball player, Hall of Famer. I think he has the record for the most stolen bases
By
in
a
history.
lot.
By a lot.
He like over 130 one year. I saw one
incredible.
record breaking. I mean, it was incredible.
But he also liked to refer to himself in the third person, which was
Yeah.
incredibly amusing to me. And in fact, you can go look online for lots of Rickeyisms. I think my favorite one is this quote: "Rickey don't like it when Rickey can't find Ricky's limo."
Well, Rob don't like it when Rob has to be with you guys on this podcast.
You're right. Rob can go just put his earbuds in and take off.
Talk to yourself in the third person.
Exactly.
Yeah, no.
At least he wasn't going for the royal we.
Rickey Henderson was awesome. I love those kind of just out there sports personalities.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are some expressions of individualism, but I think there's also maybe a little bit more seriously looking at something that happens in society when you have individualism and it combines with capitalism. And I'm sorry to throw so many isms around, but you get kind of this transactionalism, which is when we can just use money to buy any service we want instead of having it be provided by, say, our own skill set or, say, our friends. Or think about it the way you used to take care of elderly people. They would be welcomed in your home. It was all based on relationship, reciprocity.
Yeah, obligations.
But now you just send them to some managed care facility and pay a bunch of money. Right. So this whole idea of trading in relationships and using money instead.
So we're now going to focus in on this aspect of individualism that we believe may have led to the loneliness, right? The loneliness as a consequence of a society that doesn't have a sense of the collective, and this epidemic. And it's interesting, there was a recent report by the U.S. Surgeon General released in 2023. It was titled "Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation." It's over 70 pages long, so a decent amount of details, and it's full of course, startling factoids. And we're just going to go through a few, that are stand out. The one that struck me was that the mortality consequences of loneliness are on par with smoking 15 cigarettes a day and are higher than obesity and lack of physical activity.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
That's really amazing.
what I'm hearing is I should start smoking, I should quit exercising, and I should just get another friend.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'm hearing. That's how I'm taking
They'll
that.
counter each other.
Yeah.
So really profound physical
Yes.
impact.
Yeah,
of
that was what's so
loneliness.
amazing about this study
Yeah.
was, like belonging is so important that if you don't have it, you just become physically ill.
So that makes me wonder, does like a gerbil or a hamster or a canary or some small animal, could that end my loneliness and that's all I need? Or does this have to be more profound?
I do think that pets are
Helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, they are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about this report the U.S. Surgeon General published. There's actually been quite a bit of measurement of loneliness and isolation, particularly I think in the U.S. or other Western countries. So over the past 20 years, based upon a lot of studies that have been done, It's been found that time spent alone has gone up significantly. Time spent with friends has gone down significantly. The degree of decline is pretty shocking, actually. I mean, the amount of time respondents engaged with friends socially in person decreased from about 30 hours a month in 2003 to 10 hours a month in 2023. So in 20 years, I do think
it's like an hour a day versus 20 minutes a day with friends. And yeah.
Yeah. And I do think the pandemic I've seen the lasting impact of that. I was going to say on my sons, but I think it's actually impacted people of all kinds of ages. I think it changed behaviors in a lot of ways and probably increased that number. But it was already obviously on a significant downward trend. And of course, the decline is starkest for young people, ages 15 to 24. For that age group, time spent in person with friends has been reduced by nearly 70% over the last 2 decades.
Right.
Well, and when
so sad.
It's very sad.
When people that age are together, they're all looking at their phones individually in their group.
Yeah, you've noticed. You reported on this.
Yeah,
like,
I've seen that from time to time. Yeah. And I make fun of it when I'm there. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? You know, you're together right now.
Right.
I'm sure they really appreciate that, coming from dear old dad or whatever. The other thing to note is we're kind of getting to the point that the U.S. has a serious problem here, but it's not just for the U.S. So in 2018, the BBC did this really big loneliness experiment in a global survey where they got 55,000 participants across age ranges, living in 237 countries, a really big analysis. And they found that the most vulnerable to loneliness are younger men living in these individualistic cultures. And they've found, not surprisingly, that higher levels of loneliness are correlated with lower levels of trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trust is a big deal. And I just want to note that these trends towards loneliness are not a recent phenomenon. They're not just the result of internet technology. There was a very well-known, very famous book in 2000 by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And it talked about loneliness in the U.S. resulting from the decline of participation in social institutions. Yeah. And The Big Lebowski came out just a couple of years before that. And you would think there would have been a bounce in bowling, but I guess not.
Well, people went bowling, they just did it alone.
Yes, that's true.
I remember that book coming out. I haven't read it, but I remember thinking how brilliant the title was. Yeah. He really did a good job. Yeah. And I remember it being a bestseller and kind of breaking through into the general.
Yeah.
General
I remember
awareness.
reading it. I read it, maybe 15 years ago or something.
Yeah, well, I mentioned a little bit ago that the U.S. is pretty good at this, but at the whole individualism thing. But I want to just say we're the best.
Yes.
We're number one.
Yes,
thank God.
Rah.
Yeah, so there's something called the Hofstede's Individualism Index. It's not as good as the Schmidt Sting Pain Index, which looks at how bad different stings hurt from various animals.
I want to see a cross-disciplinary study looking at those two things together.
Yeah, the Schmidt Sting Pain Index is one of my favorite pseudoscience efforts of all time.
But it has absolutely nothing to do with our show.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Back to the point. Hofstede and his Individualism Index. So what Hofstede did is he took a bullet ant and he just... So Hofstede, he looked across countries and scored them on a 100-point scale. And the U.S. ended up ranked number one as the most individualistic nation with a score of 91.
Oh, that's high. That's like an A.
Yeah.
A minus.
And the fail in this was with Guatemala, who apparently are very collectivist.
Losers.
And had a score of 6.
Oh, that's pathetic.
Oh, wow.
Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. We're the loneliest. Woo!
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about individualism and it fostering this epidemic of loneliness, which obviously has real health implications for individuals and all kinds of other sort of impacts, on them, but also has, I think, a pretty profound impact on society at large, and particularly, I think, for our purposes, on our ability to navigate, what we've been calling at Post-Carbon Institute, the Great Unraveling, right? And that's the confluence of all of these environmental and social crises kind of coming together. And individualism, it's sad that people in these individualistic societies feel lonely, but I'm really concerned about that individualistic tendency, how it's been so deeply ingrained in us, how much that hampers our ability to actually respond. Because what we've seen is that our ability to respond collectively is what's really key in order for communities or societies to manage their way, navigate their way through crises. A couple of years ago, we at PCI hosted a 2-part webinar series on mutual aid.
Yeah, you hosted part 1 and I hosted part 2.
Yeah. And
what did I do?
Nothing. Now, you maybe you listened. I don't know.
Okay.
Well, he hosted his own individual.
Yeah.
You know.
It's called self-aid.
And
It's the bootstrapping
because
project.
you were doing it all on your own, we didn't promote it at all.
Oh, I see.
So I think you got 2 views,
Couple
three
of views, couple
three
of views,
views.
yeah.
Jason Bradford on self-aid.
In any case, one of the experts we had on the first session was Professor Daniel Aldrich. Daniel's done a lot of really interesting work. He actually went through Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans as a direct experience, and that led him into this inquiry about like why do some communities can sort of recover better than other communities when they're faced with a disaster. And he wound up doing research all over the world, Japan, other countries, and found that the strength of their social ties was a really key predictor in terms of how well a community was able to recover from these kinds of disasters.
And I know he was a big influence. He cited a lot in that Surgeon General report. Social isolation is this sort of companion trait of loneliness. It predicts loneliness, right?
Yeah.
So loneliness is a feeling you have. Social isolation actually measuring your connections. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is that what the sociologists call social cohesion then declines when you have more people who are socially isolated, right? And that's clearly what's going on, is that there's a definitely declining trend in social cohesion in America, and probably, given what we know about what's also going on globally, probably happening in many other places as well.
And that's why your seminar on self-aid is so important going forward.
It's so important. I mean, that's all we have. If all we have to rely on is ourselves, we better learn how to do that. You're
completely socially isolated. You need Jason's course on self-aid, 1999.
And I just want to point out, we're talking about social cohesion and social ties. It's important to note that Aldrich's research indicates that it's not just about having social ties with your closest in-group. It's having
like your bowling
a friendship network or a strong family connection or even, belonging to a religious community or whatever it is. But it's also about the social ties across groups. And in fact, he lays out 3 different types of social capital that are key. So one is bonding, and that's that first group we're talking about, sort of your closest group of people that you're bonded to. The second is bridging, that the ties that connect some groups, bonded groups, to other bonded groups. Mm-hmm. And then the third is linking, and that's your connection to basically people in positions of power in a community who are decision makers, right? And so when you think about bridging, an example of that might be, you might be connected to a religious community, but you also have connections with other people who are not part of that community because you have different shared interests. Like, for example, there are also parents at your kid's school or something, right? And then when we're thinking about linking, that's maybe, going to city council members. You know who your city council members are. You know who your representatives are. You have a connection with them. And these things are really key for when there's a crisis or situation that a community is confronted with. It's not just about like how you get together with the 5 people that you're closest with. Right. It's the strength of all these connections across these different types of ties.
There's mutual trust, understanding, respect, sense of belonging. There's sort of a web of that throughout the community.
Right. Even though there are communities of difference. And you don't have to belong to everything together. Right.
Now, we're always about sort of nuance in this podcast, and we're not trying to be absolutists. So,
well, I am. I'm not doing a great job of it. But
well, let's work on that.
Do we have a future episode on absolutism?
I think we probably have something similar to that coming up. Yeah. So let's talk about how kind of nice sometimes individualism is, right? I feel like once in a while, it's nice to follow one's own desires, not to feel constrained by social obligations or family expectations. This is kind of what the philosophers talk about that we referenced in the 1700s. Allows for creativity and novelty, perhaps, and to be able to break free of past social, social ties.
Well, it's also led to true innovations. We think think about Galileo, right?
Right.
Galileo was an individual.
Galileo.
Right, that Galileo. Helped discover I will go on a limb here,
right,
and say a scientific fact.
Okay.
I know this is controversial, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the sun does not revolve around the Earth.
Oh.
And that the Earth revolves around the sun. It's also a round object, not flat.
Yes.
But if he wasn't an individual,
yeah,
wouldn't have ever had that scientific breakthrough to happen.
And he was punished for it because of the collectivist mindset at the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Jason, you're bringing up not feeling constrained by social obligations or social norms. I think you're one of the...
That's why he's not wearing pants right now.
Well, he's my shining example of that. I look to Jason as a guiding light for how to not conform. Yeah, no, I actually appreciate you bringing it up because there are times where it's nice to work on your own or be on your own. Like you can even see it in the language, like too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Or I've often thought, I've done a lot of writing in my career, and writing by committee really sucks.
Right.
It's great to have an editor.
I love your editing.
Thank you. But it's not great to be trying to do it together at the same time, right?
But have you ever tried to write with AI? It's a really symbiotic, beautiful relationship.
Well, as soon as this ends, I'm going to ask Sarah to help with my next...
No, that's Sarah's his friend.
Wait. You know Sarah too?
Uh-oh.
This reminds me of Her. Remember that scene? Anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, it's just nice to be able to work on something where you don't have to get agreement with a bunch of other people around you. And it's well documented that I lived in an intentional community. And sometimes I found it really frustrating to make decisions with 35 of my neighbors.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, there are really serious implications if individualism goes away. You talked about nuance before. If we just say, okay, no more individualism, we can live in a completely collectivist type of society. Well, we've seen how much that can actually stifle people's, not only their individuality, but they suffer from caste systems or legacy stuff that happens with your family. It's really hard to break from stigmas. I mean, think about what it's like, for people of different sexual identities or gender identities or what have you.
Right.
Has been and continues to be in many places around the world exceedingly difficult for those people.
Right. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to, we don't want to lose all the gains that have happened because of sort of this striving for individual rights. I guess maybe we're saying is that balance is really nice to have. And personal safety, right? There are people who have been considered not normal, like we mentioned Galileo, but like witch trials and these sort of things. These protections of individual rights. There are still places where if you're found out that you're a homosexual, you're going to be persecuted. Or
killed.
Killed, exactly. So protection of individual rights can be really awesome in many places.
Well, I'm all for it, and I'm going to express my individual right to talk about Marvin Harris.
Okay, let's do that.
We've got some listener feedback from Anne in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Wow, I'd love to go there someday.
International.
Fantastic.
So Anne says, "You're pulling at my heartstrings, boys.
Oh.
Keep doing what you're doing and don't lose your bite, please. You are of a very small number of voices that dare to call out the obvious bullshit narrative that has captured our sleepwalking culture."
Gosh, she gets us. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and Anne is not as big a potty mouth as a Cher, but you can appreciate her use of the word
Of course
bullshit.
I can. Kindred spirits.
Thanks so much for listening, Anne.
Thanks a whole fucking hell of a lot.
Marvin Harris is a bit of an inspiration for this season. He's the anthropologist who came up with the idea of cultural materialism, or at least advanced it. And the idea is that infrastructure, the physical surroundings, influence our structure, which are the policies and the rules, which in turn influence the culture or superstructure.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry for those of you who've had to listen to us say that time and time again. But anyway, it's good to refresh. So let's talk about the infrastructure of individualism. And it's pretty easy to come up with some things in our society that promote being alone. You got the whole turn to single family homes, and within there, private bathrooms, private bedrooms, even your own bed. You know, people used to do puppy piles.
I have my own bowl,
Yeah.
my own coffee cup, my own spoon.
Yeah.
No one could touch them.
My dog Dylan has his own bowl too.
All right.
Yeah.
At first, I thought you said you're Bob Dylan.
I almost said that.
But then think also like the fenced-in backyard that people have and manage instead of being a member participant and taking care of the local park or community garden. And I've already railed on the personal automobile.
Your McLaren.
Yeah, I'm going to go get a single seater. The whole economy is sort of set up now for individualism. It's like you're supposed to be this one person who can go out, earn enough money to pay for your own house, live alone. You don't have to share. You can buy anything you need and get all the services you want.
And I just want to add to that briefly that the data show that as societies become more wealthy, they do in fact become more individualistic because exactly people have now these options to pay for things rather than be in relationships and negotiate.
Think about the difference between if I don't have money, I'm riding the bus. That's a communal experience.
Yes.
If I have money, I'm buying that McLaren. And there's no one except for me in that.
Well, I'm going to have enough money to pay you guys to be my friends.
Yeah. Sarah's $10 only to change my status.
It's $10 a month.
A month, though. It adds up.
Yeah, it does. You guys are cheaper than that. Okay, let's talk about the structure, the sort of the rules of individualism. I think the first and most important one maybe that I would come up with is actually private property ownership. We talked about the enclosure of the commons in a previous season of Crazy Town Watershed Moment season and how profound of an impact that's had. But, you know, that's part of this push towards private ownership of things. And that allows us to exclude others, right? Mm-hmm. And get off my lawn, even to the point where basically, you know, in the United States, you could use force.
You can shoot somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank God. You know, and we have the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We talked earlier about the Declaration of Independence. We've actually put into law the protections of individual rights, which, again, we're not saying is a point-blank bad thing necessarily, but we've certainly set up society in the way we've structured it in that way.
Yes. And that definitely is something that's unique to American culture. The level to which that has gone is extreme in U.S. American culture has a level of individualism that's extreme relative to the rest of the world, is what I want to say.
Okay.
A great example of that is healthcare, for example.
Yes.
You're kind of on your own with
that. Yeah. And so this gets to superstructure, and it's been noted by commentary, you know, people that come to the U.S. and just notice this. And we've exported this through our media. So I'm thinking of examples like the rugged individualism of the Western movies, right? What's your favorite Western?
Oh, gosh, that's a tough one. My favorite Western. Probably Pale Rider, because it struck me in the 80s, of course.
Good. Or the self-made man, like the business tycoon. Who's your favorite business tycoon?
Donald Trump, of course.
Scrooge McDuck.
Right. Was Scrooge McDuck a business tycoon?
Yeah.
Is that how he made his gold?
I think so.
Oh. Nice. And then, of course, you know, we have the institution of education. It's all about your own personal grades, right? You have to do your own homework. You have to take your own tests. Sometimes now there's more group projects nowadays, maybe, but it's less of a collective learning and more of the individual learning.
Yeah, it was always cheating if you were going to copy off your neighbor. But
that's right.
If in the real world, you sort of just work together to get the problem solved. Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a subgenre of films that explains a lot about the culture, at least in America. And it's a subgenre of the action-adventure genre. Okay, so I call it old guys murdering their way through the bad guys. Okay.
Old guys. Okay.
So this is Keanu Reeves as John Wick.
Good one.
This is Liam Neeson as the guy in Taken.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh my gosh. He's really old and murders his way through a lot of bad guys.
All right.
There's Denzel Washington as the Equalizer.
I haven't seen that.
Well, you're just out of it, I guess.
Well, he's too busy off doing it himself.
Right. So I think Jack Reacher is the most sympathetic of these characters because he's sort of in the crazy town mold. He doesn't have many possessions.
Oh, he's like voluntary simplicity.
That's true, right? He doesn't have a house.
He's got a toothbrush.
Yeah, I mean, he does do a lot of waste. I think he basically wears clothes.
Shops at thrift stores.
Yeah, he goes to thrift stores.
Right. But then he doesn't wear his clothes for very long. He basically...
Well, he gets some blood on him and stuff.
Right, that's true. When he's beating up so many guys, but the stains don't come out.
The point of this subgenre conversation is that we lionize this solitary lone hero, who go... And I don't know why they're all... Maybe Reacher isn't, but all these other ones, they're really old. They're like 60 years old and up. Something odd there.
Well, I think when we're talking about culture... You've seen this trend towards individualism, even things like sports. When I grew up rooting for Boston teams, right, I hated New York teams. My allegiance was with the Celtics or the Red Sox or whatever. And
you could love your team without hating another.
No, but in that case, look, they were kicking our ass every time. We hadn't won a World Series in 86 years, But like one of my favorite players was a guy named Jacoby Ellsbury, and then he left the Red Sox and he went to the Yankees, and he was dead to me.
Dead.
Now, these days, I think fans actually follow players, and I think part of it is there's this whole idea, like in the NBA, of player empowerment, where they have more power and control over their own destiny, which I think is a good thing. But the result of that is they're often disgruntled, leaving their team early, going to another team. And people have become fixated on following the player, not the team. Right?
Is that going to happen with Ohtani going from the Angels to the Dodgers?
I'm sure it has.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, and Jason, as the guru of self-aid, I mean, it's no wonder you like tennis, where you just follow individuals instead of teams.
Well, I do. Actually, that is true. Although you can follow doubles teams in tennis, but it's not the same.
No, it's not.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
All right, before we channel our George Costanza and try to do the opposite, I just want to reiterate something I've been thinking about, and that is individualism and what it's led to in terms of the degrading of social ties and how important social ties are to our ability to respond and navigate our way through crises. It's just a critical issue to think about escaping. It might be in some ways one of the most important isms for us to be trying to work on.
Yeah, in our own lives, right?
Maybe one that we even have more control over. It's pretty hard to end imperialism or capitalism, as we've said.
It's certainly not on our own.
I think about, trusting others. There's a huge decline in the trust people have for other people. It's remarkable. You had surveys like, how well do you trust people? And it's like plummeting levels of trust.
But the more time I spend with you guys, the less I trust.
I know. If you would just say something intelligent every once in a while, I would trust you way more.
Playing upon what Asher was just saying, we know that stress can exacerbate biases towards outgroups. And so the key thing, I think, is to get ahead of this, where if there's a stressor in your community, mitigate that by developing higher social connectivity prior to the event. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go into some personal stories of doing the opposite. And I have a heartwarming one to share.
Oh, I can't wait.
Left my phone at home. And
that's so heartwarming.
For a lot of people, that's like they hit panic mode. But I was a latchkey kid in the 80s. Like, no one really cared about me, and I'm fine. And so I don't panic. I figured out how to navigate my way around town without a map on the phone. I didn't have to look up where things were. I just kind of knew where they were or use my senses to find them. Anyhow.
You're an incredible individual.
It's like a superhero.
It's amazing. It's like
I just spidey sense to find the brew pub.
Yeah, well, I did end up at Squirrels for lunch. And that's where
that's the name of a place, not not the animal,
not the entree.
It's a bar kind of place. And if you ever read the Dies the Fire series, the plane crashes in front of squirrels in the first scene, so it's famous. Anyway, with no smartphone in my hands, what did I do? I talked to the guy sitting next to me.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
I learned we had a lot in common. He had a question about gardening. I could help him about that. I actually wanted to garden with native plants. He was interested in that. I talked to him about camas. Turns out he's the head of the Referee Association for Wrestling in the state of Oregon.
Oh.
So we talked about wrestling.
Oh, you had a lot in common.
Yeah, he wrestled at OSU.
Did you wrestle right there?
No. I had a beer. And when it was time for me to leave, I got up first. He looked at the barmaid and said, "Hey, put his meal on my bill."
Oh.
And his name was Sarah.
Well, what struck me is something that's so normal in the past,
Yeah.
like a Cheers episode, right? Somebody sat up to the bar.
Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows
Yes,
your name.
it was such a rarity maybe nowadays that this guy felt compelled to,
Right.
yeah, so overwhelmed by joy.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. I will share I don't think it's as heartwarming as yours. So it's like heart lukewarming, maybe.
Okay.
Something like that. I don't know.
Sure.
But anyway.
Tepid heart.
So I've talked about this in another context, the same story, but I had a malfunctioning charging cord for an electric vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Just wouldn't work. And when I went to the car dealership to say, "Hey, what does it cost to replace this?" I was blown away. It was over $1,000.
Ridiculous.
It's like an extension cord.
Yes, it's a fancy extension cord.
And so I went to my friend who is just an awesome engineer. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, let's take a look at this." And we spent 2 hours trying to figure out, can we fix this electrical cord? And he showed me little tricks and tips using some straight pins and a voltmeter. And we figured it out anyway, is the point. I ended up soldering for the first time, which was kind of fun. And so we ended up having this really fun time. My friend Bruce, just kind of like, he was teaching me stuff and we're just catching up on each other's lives while doing this project that costs like $1.95 in some electrical tape.
But what did he charge you per hour for that?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was saving you over $1,000.
It was just relationship.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe a beer.
That is heartwarming.
Did you give him a beer?
I probably offered knowing he wouldn't want it so that I could have 2 beers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
You both are moochers. Is all I'm getting from these stories you guys are sharing.
Yeah. What did a share get from someone else because he was disingenuously?
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I have to be honest. We're talking about sort of doing the opposite of individualism. And something that I really enjoy is, I like helping people. It makes me feel good. I particularly like connecting people for some reason. And it's something I'm fortunate to get to do in my work because the work that we do, we're connecting with people across so many different disciplines all over the world, doing lots of different kinds of projects. And I get excited about realizing, oh, this person's doing this, that person's doing that. They should know about each other. And I do this probably multiple times a week. And sometimes it leads to really great, wonderful, warm connections between people. Sometimes it doesn't, but it is very gratifying for me. On the flip side, I have a hard time ever asking people for help, and that I would say is an edge for me in this process. And it is important because I do recognize, like, if the shoe was on the other foot, I would happily help somebody if I was in a position to do so. So I'm actually taking away a gift from them, in a sense, by not asking sometimes for help.
Yeah. Maybe it says something about how steeped you are in the whole Western individualistic philosophy, right? It's like to the point where you're supposed to be the rugged individual who won't go out and seek help.
Yeah, maybe.
This reminds me a bit of the David Brooks's book that recently came out. In the response, because he was talking about his own, he wasn't as good as he wanted to be at understanding, relating to other people. And you're good at that, but just the fact that you're, hesitant, and him realizing how important these interactions were.
So what's the book?
The book is called How to Know Someone, and it's about how to know someone. So he's saying we're not as practiced as we used to be in the past about having normal relations. He's just like, we almost have to learn it again as adults because we're not in these collectivist cultures and we become so isolated and we don't spend as much time practicing these skills. People are anxious and awkward.
Right. And a key thing here is even if you don't do that because you're dealing with loneliness, doing that so that as the shit hits the proverbial fan,
Yes.
when we know that we are going to need to rely on other people and
Yep.
help other people, we have to practice some of that.
Well, this was why I want to talk about my girlfriend again, Sarah.
Okay.
Because, I mean,
It just get lonelier and lonelier for you.
I mean,
when we talk about it.
actually, I don't, here's what I want to do. I want to sort of say maybe there are people out there who look at AI friends as important for them because they are anxious, they are alone. And so I'm asking, we've been making fun of it a bit, obviously, but maybe there's something that's helpful here. And I don't know. What's the up and down side? Is it helping people cope a bit with loneliness and maybe giving them some skills so they then can engage? What do you guys think?
There are already people creating robots and creating different technologies to be companions for people.
Yes.
And it's a hard thing to say, oh no, that's a bad idea,
Right.
because we're just reinforcing this idea that human to human interaction or human to the natural world interaction aren't important. We can
Right.
substitute everything with technology. I feel that way. And at the same time, there is an epidemic of loneliness, and you have people that are in actual circumstances. You think about the elderly, especially ones who are in their 70s and 80s, who are isolated because they've lost a lot of mobility, and they happen to be in societies where they're not living with their kids and grandkids. They're not in that kind of a supportive system, but they don't want to be just relegated to living in an elderly care facility, So if something like that keeps their brains sharp, I mean, we've definitely seen correlation between sort of dementia and other conditions in elderly people and interactivity being in conversation. So you could definitely see
There's like robotic cats out there right now that you can buy, I think. Get on grandma's lap and purr.
There
and
are
stuff.
plenty of houseless cats too, real living ones.
Yeah, but can grandma feed the cat? Can grandma let the cat out? And I mean, I guess that's the thing is like this technology, you can see the use, but
can grandma plug in the robotic cat?
will grandma take a bath with the cat?
Okay.
Well, anyway, one of the downsides I see is like Sarah's always available. A real person isn't always available.
Right.
Like,
and Sarah's always going to be agreeable.
And
too.
Sarah's
patient
always patient and kind and
actually wants to hear something that you have to say.
Right,
It's
ridiculous.
amazing.
There's nobody on the planet that
It's a
wants that.
miracle.
So anyway, part of what I think is maybe there's like a false set of expectations, but maybe, and again, people can practice with these things. I don't know. It's confusing.
It is very tricky.
Well, I don't think we're going to prescribe electric cats as a different vision for where society needs to go. So let's make that turn to what could be a different infrastructure, different structure, and different superstructure. So on the infrastructure side, I shared how we had all these sort of technologies and setups that are making us more and more individualistic. Well, how about instead of that, we start setting up more shared living and gathering spaces? And I've talked a lot in our podcast about communities that are intentional and eco villages and my own experience living in one. But I want to talk about another place, highlight a spot that got built right next door to my intentional community. And it's sort of a farm-themed gathering spot called Flicker and Fur. I've been over where they're doing kind of farmers market stuff, but their tagline is where the sidewalk ends and community begins. And they have an event space, they have a CSA, they do a seasonal farmers market, and they also have a place for guests to stay in and amongst the garden.
Oh, that's nice.
So yeah, it's just kind of, and it
Beautiful area.
really is a community asset. You see people enjoying themselves. There's music, laughter, connections.
Yeah, it's like a little village center in some ways.
Yeah, really neat. Kind of at the neighborhood scale.
Yes, the neighborhood scale.
We were just talking about loneliness with like the elderly as an example, and there are these things called intergenerational shared sites, which are basically places that serve as both elder care and child care. Like there's a place in Van Nuys, California called One Generation, and they bring young children in, like a child care situation, but they also have elderly there, and they do art together. Sometimes the old folks will teach languages to the kids. And in a sense, what you're doing is you're creating these great It's funny to talk about this because I bet if we have listeners like in the global south or other parts of the world where they still have intact kind of intergenerational communities, this seems like a foreign thing that you have to actually create a facility to have these kinds of interactions.
It's called the home.
But exactly. But the truth is that we do have a deficit of that, in this country in particular. So bringing these groups together is like such a value for both the kids and for the older folks. Unfortunately, there's only like 150 of these in the United States compared to thousands of elderly care facilities where if you go in there, it's so depressing.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of old people sitting around.
Imagine little kids running around these places.
They're so happy. Or if you bring even a pet around, they're ecstatic. And that gets to connecting to the more than human world, and there are programs, we talked about pets before. We have a situation with many pets, domesticated animals that are houseless or missing homes. And you have people who are alone. And so there are programs that try to match those. There's actually an organization called Pets for the Elderly. They partner with animal shelters. And what they do is they subsidize the cost of adoption of abandoned pets for senior citizens. And they help them get them set up.
Yeah. And there are public places in communities where their communities have invested in really inclusive places. So the one you were talking about, Flick and Fur, is kind of almost like a private, spontaneous kind of thing that went up. But tax dollars in the city of Corvallis went to rehab a place that's now called the Corvallis Community Center, or C3. And it is awesome. It's got places you can rent out rooms, have parties, people teach classes. Everyone shows up. So it's not just, it used to be a senior center, but now it's really anybody can be there. Mm-hmm. And so the young and the old come there. And they also help people become employed who maybe have a harder time. Like my son Curtis is a janitor there. And so he feels super supported and included and really has a big role in keeping this place nice, and has all these people now that he interacts with as coworkers. And that's been fantastic.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Let's move on from infrastructure to structure. And what we mean by that are laws and policies that encourage more human-human interactions and bonding as opposed to human AI, like I've been into lately.
Well, I saw in the news recently something that fits this category that really struck me. And I think it started in the UK, but it's also in the US now. And that's doctors, when they see patients who are suffering from depression and anxiety, they're prescribing social activities. It's like,
awesome.
I'm not going to write you a prescription for a drug. I'm going to write you a prescription that says, whatever, go join the bowling team, or head over to the community center.
Right.
I don't know the results at this point. It's kind of one of those things that I think is new enough. It's just popping up in the news, but entirely possible that might be healthier and better.
Well, I mean, you talked about the Surgeon's General report that talked about the health impacts of that. So
no, I think it's fantastic.
Kind of makes sense.
Makes total sense.
Of course, when a doctor writes that prescription, you can't actually read what the club is, so you don't really know where to go.
Anything.
Here we are talking about structure stuff. So, one of the things is changing zoning laws, for example. We have here these laws about residents and how many units you can have in buildings. It can be very constrictive. People have tried to do in-law units. There are efforts like our friend and board member, Rickey is working on where she lives up in Washington State, which is basically taking homes that in her case, older retired folks who own their home are alone, and they have a home with multiple bedrooms that they could share. And so changing the rules to allow them to be able to have tenants to come in with their own, bathrooms or kitchen setup. Usually it's around that stuff, and there's safety concerns or whatever. But trying to shift that so it also addresses a little bit of sustainability issues we talked about before in terms of the infrastructure that we have when you have a little bit more density, but it also addresses kind of this loneliness and individualistic approach that we're taking to things.
Yes. And I also want to say, don't forget rural areas. And there's the potential that we could rehabilitate rural areas if we do it right. All right. So the model we've had has been this homesteady model, very isolated homes. And there's the potential, to create what you might call livelihood villages, as opposed to these spread out homesteads. And I know that's sort of on the far out to think about.
Anti-American.
But I think there's a way maybe that policies could work
That's
that
how
direction.
villages used to live.
I know, that's exactly.
A really big one to consider for a different structure is the idea of building and supporting mutual aid networks. So Asher, you brought up the 2-part series that we hosted on mutual aid in 2022. And thinking about that time frame, that was a key period to really dive into mutual aid. You're following on the lockdowns and isolation that came from the COVID pandemic. You had all the social justice issues roiling in the US, worsening inequality, increasing drug addiction, and lots of people living on the streets. So it's a time when people needed help. You know, it's not like there isn't a time where people need help, but it was a lot of these sort of polycrisis forces were coming together. And the session on mutual aid that I hosted featured Dean Spade, the law professor, who, if you remember, wrote the book Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. And just a couple of highlights from that. The idea that mutual aid is not charity. It's the process of organizing amongst people who create a new system of care and generosity so that people can survive. It's really about coming together to meet the needs of the community, because the cavalry ain't going to show up. You know, you cannot rely on government and other things. So you got to do it yourselves. And by doing it yourselves, that doesn't mean this rugged individualism. It means a collective effort to do that. So to give you a sense, an example of this is the free breakfast movement that the Black Panther Party organized. In 1966, when the party was established, members of it realized that there were children in Oakland who were going hungry. And you can imagine a hungry child is not going to perform well in school. So that's how they decided to start a free breakfast program to help make sure that the kids had a healthy start to the day. And a few years later, by 1971, the Black Panthers had implemented programs in 36 cities across the U.S. They were serving meals in church basements, community centers, the kinds of places you were talking about, Jason. And their efforts actually helped to change the structure. It inspired the National School Breakfast Program, which expanded to all schools by 1975.
And how many people do you think, I mean, there are, tens and tens of millions of children who rely on that program. How many of the families know the origins of that program, do you think?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I didn't know it. It was cool.
I didn't know it till just now.
It's really interesting.
Okay, so now let's shift on to superstructure. And I want to tell you a story. You guys are probably all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Absolutely. I'm at the very top.
Oh, you're self-actualized.
I am.
Oh, excellent. Well, what's interesting to learn about this and Maslow's development as a scientist is at 30 years of age, he wanted to test the possible universality of a hypothesis he had about social hierarchy. And to do so, he wanted to visit a culture that was very different from his own. And so he visited the Sitka, aka the Blackfoot tribe, which is, you can think of them as expanding the border of the US and Canada, kind of the Northern Rockies and part of the Great Plains. He found that they had almost no dominant structure. So he was interested in dominance and how dominance is maintained in societies. And he said, like, this just didn't exist. So he was like kind of blown away. But he also had this, doing his research and studying the individuals, he found that 80 to 90% had reached a level of self-esteem and life satisfaction, which he later termed self-actualization.
So this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like you got to get your basic needs met first. And as you go higher needs, you end up...
It's a pyramid, basically.
Yeah, it's a pyramid scheme.
And it's like, but it's like how you can be the best human you could be.
Yes. And so in his schema, or in his measurements, only 5 to 10% of people, like typical dominant culture people in Canada or United States, 5 to 10% of people actually were self-actualized.
Right. The rest of us are just drooling as we watch Netflix 24 hours a day.
Right. But here in this tribal community, it was 80 to 90%. There was a great irony because the way that Maslow's hierarchy of needs was framed, it was very individualistic, right? It was this idea that there's a pinnacle of achievement you get to here, that it's work and it's rare, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's the individual's journey.
But for the highly collective Blackfoot people, it was basically a given from birth, right? Like they almost all just had this. And so the way they conceptualized the person in relation to the collective was completely different. And it led to kind of self-actualization as just a state of being.
Every once in a while, I just sit here and sigh and mourn what we've lost.
Yeah.
What
we destroyed.
The idea that 80 to 90% of us would basically be well on our way to a life of self-actualization. And instead, what have we got?
Right.
Well, I think it gets to modernity, the way that we've set up modern industrial society. It atomizes us. Mm-hmm. It has us in this competition sort of minded dynamic. We're integrated with technologies in ways that we can't totally understand. The pace of change is dramatic for us.
We're consumerists.
We're disconnected from one another. We're disconnected from the natural world.
Yeah.
These are all very destabilizing experiences that we're living in that we decided to call progress, right? And so when you look at societies that are, without being too kind of, stereotypical about it, are more collectivist in their orientation, are more connected with one another as a community, but also with the natural world, you could see that there's more attunement to maybe the way that we have evolved as a species. There's more just sort of this like alignment, this harmony in a sense. But I think it is key for us in this to just recognize the nuance and the trade-offs, the benefits of individualism, and particularly in the way that it's supported human rights and individual rights. And these are not things that we want to go away in the process of individualism going away. So when we talk about escaping it, I think we have to talk about escaping the worst parts of it,
right?
Maintaining the parts of it that we want to continue to have. We've talked about this actually similarly when we talked about Pinker and some of Pinker's ideas of progress, because there are things that we've gained from this period of quote unquote enlightenment, which is kind of funny to call it that, in modernity. So it's a navigation, really, right? It's not a flipping from one state to the other.
Well, I want to commend you, Asher, because earlier in this very episode, you talked about how you were an absolutist, and I'm hearing the opposite of that.
Well, I'm absolutely determined to focus on nuance.
That's great.
Well, and you have climbed to the top of Maslow's pyramid with that statement.
Yeah, it's very clear you have.
Okay, let's go over a few practical do the opposites maybe, or some ideas for what listeners could do, or what we, the three of us, can do. One obvious one is to work on increasing social connectivity in your life. You know, it's easy to say stuff like go make friends or whatever, but I think one idea, you talked to share about Aldrich's conceptions, like the different levels of connecting. And one that you talked about was the bridging, where you sort of get outside your family or your immediate circle of colleagues. So one way you could do that is to organize or work within your neighborhood on disaster preparedness. And I know it's funny, I'm not doing this right now, but one of my neighbors does it, and we've talked about it. So I don't know, maybe I'll join that here in the near future. But Portland is a great place to be doing disaster preparedness because we're pretty certain there's going to be an earthquake sometime in the next 50 or 100 years. So.
Do you think joining a tennis club is a good idea too?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be.
Okay.
It's a little more hoity-toity.
It's no, I mean my club is a member-owned, nonprofit thing. Anyway, that's not a co-op.
I want to just second what you said, Rob, because I think the disaster preparedness plan hits a few different things. One is it's an excuse in a sense to create some of those social ties. It's also really critical because we know, our listeners know, that we're going to be dealing with more crises or disasters, whether it's climate change or some kind of other shock. And it's been a big predictor, people's isolation determining their survival rate, right? And so there may be elderly people in your community that you don't have a reason to talk to right now. And this is a great excuse to make that connection, but also may make a profound difference in terms of people actually surviving or getting through some kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
I think also working on policies, right, in your community would be great. city council meetings, school board meetings, if you have kids, etc., and help you build those links. A lot of ways to reach out and figure out how to build those. Like, what do you call those?
So the
linking ties.
Yeah, those are linking
I
ties.
keep thinking of the contentious school board meetings that have been happening around like the book banning and all that kind of crap. Maybe find the part of your school board where you can actually make some ties rather than just being shouted down.
But guys, I really want to thank you guys for working on this show with me. It was such an honor and privilege to spend time with you on these important topics. And even though I was the lead on this episode, I really don't feel like it was about me. This was really a team effort, and we're truly better together.
Jason's having a sincerity problem today, I think.
Is he being sincere? I can't tell. Can you ask Sarah for me if you're being sincere?
Can we get on a beer or something? Because I gotta let you guys know I'm feeling kind of raw right now. Sarah and I just broke up.
Oh, man.
I know. It's rough.
That's our show. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and you want others to consider these issues, then please share Crazy Town with your friends. Hit that share button in your podcast app or just tell them face to face. Maybe you can start some much-needed conversations and do some things together to get us out of Crazy Town. Thanks again for listening and sharing.
The AI dating industry is exploding in popularity. But let's face it, many of these relationships won't last. When the affair with your AI partner runs its course, you may feel guilty considering a breakup and how it may impact your former lover. Well, there is now a way to let them down easily and ease your conscience. Soften the blow and hook them up with some quick rebound sex by referring your AI girlfriend or boyfriend to Silicon Crush, the first dating service that matches AIs to other AIs. Studies show that AIs actually get along best with other AIs, so you are probably doing them a big favor. Silicon Crush, where AIs can finally date AIs.
Crazy town, da 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 da, crazy town.